I've been told you know your way around the Reach, but I'd wager you're not from here, are you? The giant bearded Nord tapped the side of his massive nose. I can smell these things, you know. They say the Reach has got a way of sinking its roots into you and not letting go. What's your story, Breton? High Rock? Vera shifted on the bar stool and took a sip of ale, delaying the expected response. Not much of a story. The lie didn't taste all that bitter anymore. It wasn't much of a story, in no small part because the last 6 months were starting to blur, and what came before had bleached of all color. An old photograph in sepia from a place long gone. A past that no longer felt like hers. Some things from the early days stood out, crisp, arresting moments. Waking up on a bloody altar, stark naked and in horrible agony. Wandering, terrified, through the remains of carnage, bodies strewn on the ground, torn to shreds, not a living soul in sight. Then, later, hiding from rough-looking types who roved the hills and crags, she couldn't tell at first whether they were hunters or brigands, or whether there was a difference. Hiding from wild animals who were busy evading the rough types, or, when they got lucky, busy eating them right back. Still, keeping to the wilderness had felt like a safer choice. Originally, she had come upon the herbalist's hut after about a month of skulking around and sleeping in caves. On the verge of protein poisoning from her diet of rabbit and lean fowl, she was used to trapping rats and pigeons and other urban fauna. So the rabbits hadn't been that much different. It was early summer when she arrived, and the pickings were slim, nothing ripe yet, and the few early cases of the runs had discouraged her from experimenting with the wild edibles. The man who lived in the ramshackle house, an old Altmer, as the tall, gold-skinned bastards were called here. She'd learned to stay the fuck away from the black-robed ones quickly enough. Was half senile with age and cloudy with a drinking habit, but he was kindly, in a roomy, distracted, can't remember what. I did with the nightshade kind of way. He'd let her stay, initially as a cook, then as a helper, and then as a friend. He'd had a daughter, he said. She died young, at 67. He didn't offer the details. It had been 102 years ago. Vera didn't press him about it. It was an odd friendship. Two people who had little in common except for their respective loneliness. One night, after a bottle of Alto wine shared over grilled mushrooms and roasted squash, she spilled herself to him, all the horrors, all the impossibilities of her displacement. Not the how of it, nor the why. There wasn't much she could offer by way of sense in that department. But the what that had come before, he didn't seem all that surprised, grumbled something about the mysteries of Aetherius, but didn't offer anything like an explanation. After that, he took it upon himself to teach her some basics, the history, the geography, the politics, and some of his trade. Though his mind was slipping, and they both knew it. Lovenar didn't seem upset about it exactly. They both knew why she was there, why he'd let her stick around. He didn't want to die alone, and he wanted to pass something on before he went. Once she got the hang of the flora, foraging came easily. She'd had to do this once the last of the infrastructure had collapsed, and these mountains were, oddly enough, safer than the crammed urban exoskeleton overrun with gangs and madmen she had called home. Lovenar taught her a bit of his craft, too. Enough to get by, to assist him with his messes. She didn't have the patience for the finicky work of brewing, but she was good at finding stuff, learning the plants, recognizing where they'd grow, a sort of intuitive sense of which plant would work best, and which were still too young to be potent. She didn't love the work, but she didn't mind it either. The biodiversity had dazzled her initially. Her old world had lost most of its life forms. The plants she knew from books. There weren't computers widely available by then anymore. Something about the collapse of rare earth mining. Once. Apparently you could just snap a picture with your phone, and it'd identify the plant for you. Vera remembered phones only vaguely. Her mother had still known the world's lushness firsthand, but Vera was born into extinction. Lovenar had tried to coax her magic to manifest. "You're a sodding Breton, girl. It shouldn't be so hard." But she couldn't perform even the most basic of spells, not even to light a fire. It made no sense to her. Lovenar kept describing what the connection to her magic should feel like, but she felt nothing. Until one night, again after a bottle of wine she'd traded for some basic health potions with a local encampment of Redguard hunters, he brought out a purple gem and an old, ugly amulet worn to a glossy sheen on the reverse side where the carved bone had rubbed against skin and cloth after years of use. "The enchantment is getting thin," he told her, putting the violet gem in her hand. It glowed and pulsed, warm against her palm. It was tiny, about the size of a wild apple. But something about it kept Vera wanting to pry it apart, to bite into it, and taste what that pulsing swirl would feel like on her tongue. Lovenar noticed her gaze and chuckled to himself, coughing on the exhale. The cold had settled into his lungs by that point, and it wasn't letting go, no matter how many tonics he brewed. He had an altar, a small thing made of a troll's skull, 3 eye sockets staring back at Vera with their amethyst inlays, an old wooden board holding the chartreuse filigree of the focal circle. The thing inside the gem in her palm wanted to burrow itself under her skin like a worm, like something that would make itself at home and lay its larvae. Part of her wanted to reach for it, to make room, to welcome it into herself. An almost motherly feeling. "Yes," Lovenar said then. "You can feel it, can you not?" Vera had swallowed around the tightness in her throat. Yes, she could. And what to do with it, too, even before Lovenar offered his explanation. The faint trace of the amulet's previous occupant had left a kind of structure behind it. It was almost empty, like a half-forgotten village, half abandoned, where no one but the old people lingered. In her past life, Vera sought out places like that once she escaped the city. They offered a kind of muted, overlooked safety. You will take the soul into yourself, but do not, under any circumstances, let it settle. Do you understand, girl? You feel where the grooves of the enchantment are in the amulet, yes? Vera had nodded. That. And what it was for, too. She felt it a bit with plants as well. Vague and faltering and barely there at all. Lovenar claimed that she should be able to know a plant's use even if she had never seen it before, to intuit it if she could just reach into it. Something about how plants too connected to everything else. "It'll come in time," he reassured. Vera was doubtful on that account. He was mistaking his inhuman lifespan of accumulated expertise for intuition, but with the amulet, that elusive insight was there. A rush of images, a warm cloak on a chilly night, the crackle of a hearth fire when the wind outside howled, a cup of steaming spiced wine. The cloak was worn thin, and the fire had dwindled, and the wine had cooled. "It's a frost enchantment," she said, muzzy with the realization of her own sudden certainty. Lovenar had smiled his crinkly smile, pleased that he could finally give her something to take with her, into a future from which he would fade. The frost amulet had saved her life that winter. On her way to Markarth to find an Altmer called Calchelmo, she had a letter for him from Lovenar, a request for tutelage, calling in a final favor. Who could refuse a dying colleague's wishes? He passed on the first day of sun's dawn, a peaceful fading. She held his hand until he went cold and buried him out back, the ground hard from the frost, unyielding, as if it didn't want him yet. The icy wind smeared the tears on her cheeks. Then Markarth, her first terrified night in the great stone city carved into the mountainside, with its constant rumble of water and subterranean Dwemer machinery mimicking the sound of traffic. Back in her early childhood, when there still was any traffic to speak of, silver and blood and something nasty brewing under the surface. The first day, there'd been a forsworn attack, and the guards had harassed her. An unfamiliar Breton in a city of conspiracy and plots. They confiscated everything too, including Lovenar's letter and the little coin she had. As evidence, they'd claimed. One of them, a bald Nord with a hard glint in his pale eyes, had insinuated that she could get it all back for the right price. She told him to kindly fuck off, and both men had laughed, confident with their own impunity and a little drunk on unchecked power. But they let her go, with nothing but the clothes on her back, but her dignity intact at least. She learned from the jeweler in the market that Thalmor was gone on some expedition and wasn't expected back for another 2 months. At first, she'd hidden the warrens like a feral rat, hungry. She'd been hungry all the time, but it had been oddly reassuring. In the last few years of her past life, hunger had been a constant, familiar companion. It took her a few days to realize there were no real jobs to speak of. The smith might have liked the new apprentice, but Vera didn't know a lick about smithing. The inn was overstaffed, if anything. Lovenar had taught her to read, but her writing was still slow, the unfamiliar alphabet confusing in its repetitiveness, in the subtle nuances of its calligraphy, which she kept getting wrong. So scribe work was out. In the end, Bothella took her in. What was one more stray Breton lugging around unchecked baggage full of heartbreak and secrets? It was better than the alternative, which boiled down to 2 things really: cracking rocks or servicing the men who cracked rocks. Vera liked the old woman's approach to the craft, her crass practicality, her sardonic wit, her cynicism. Muiri had the potion work well in hand, but they needed a forager, and Vera had offered, eagerly, before they'd turn her out. She brought a sack of glowing mushrooms she gathered in one of the abandoned mines, to show her willingness to crawl around underground and put herself in harm's way if needed. Bothella had given her a once-over. Vera knew what the old witch would see. A scrawny woman, not quite young enough to pass for a newly minted, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed adventurer. A vagabond then. A derelict who slept in the warrens. Vera had brought her hand to her messy mop of poorly cropped black hair, self-conscious and hoping it didn't look as bad as it felt. The worn clothes on her back and the chipped dagger at her belt probably didn't offer much reassurance either. "I'm low on juniper, neanroot, and bilsterwort," Bothella had said and tossed her a satchel. "You'll share the room with Muiri. Be back by sundown." That had been a month ago. She'd settled in, still waiting for Thalmor to return. The feeling of the soul gem in her palm wasn't letting go of her so easily. "Still with me, lass?" Vera eyed the Nord again. He was watching her expectantly over his ale and his plate of poached potatoes and venison roast. Middle-aged, heavily tattooed, with an accent as thick as the haft of the double-handed axe strapped to his back. She took another sip to give herself something to do. "Why, do you ask?" He didn't seem like a bad sort, but it was hard to tell. He leaned in, ale and tobacco on his breath. "I need a local guide, as I said, but I like to get to know the people I'm hiring. The old woman in the apothecary said you wouldn't mind some extra septums, but I prefer for them to be well spent. As my associate likes to remind me, septums don't grow on trees." Vera took another sip of ale. Yeah, right. He could pay any of the local mercs. Hell, Vorstag would probably take the job, even now. There he was, sitting on his ass on the other side of the inn, pretending not to watch the newcomer. Been at it for weeks now, grousing about how no one was hiring. No, something about this Nord was decidedly fishy. "Who's your associate?" Vera asked instead. The Nord motioned with his head, and Vera followed his gaze. She hadn't noticed the man in the shadowed corner. Surprising. That because he wasn't exactly blending in with the surroundings. His armor looked alien, like something made of an insect's carapace. Even in the heat of the tavern, he wore a type of helmet, a red cowl obscuring his features, the entire arrangement giving him the air of an oversized mantis. He must have noticed her gaze because he inclined his head and tipped his glass. Not ale, Vera noted. Klepper's overpriced brandy, she guessed. There are plenty of idle hands in Markarth. Why would these two want to hire her? Something was out of place here, Some undercurrent agenda she was missing. She didn't like it. Why me? I need someone who's good at finding things. Someone who knows their way around the caves and crags of this god's forsaken dunghole. The Nord chuckled. I'm a valley man myself, see? And I'm looking for something I misplaced. Your current employer told me you got a knack for that sort of work. He huffed good-naturedly and fished around in his satchel until he procured a pipe. He lit up, letting the pungent smoke drift off towards the rafters. Won't lie. I'm not looking to spend much. You lot got spoiled here with all the silver gushing from out of the city's bowels. We've been on the road for some time. My pockets ain't that deep at the moment, lass. Bullshit. He wasn't eating frugal, and his buddy in the corner sure wasn't drinking frugal either. What are you looking for then? He grinned into his beard, the tattoos twisting with the expression. Vera noted that his left incisor was chipped. I'll tell you if you take the job. She shouldn't have considered it, but the prospect of having enough cash to bribe the guards into returning her recommendation letter was too damn tempting. Thalmor didn't exactly have a reputation for taking in strays. If you're looking to hire a fighter, I won't do you much good. Not looking for a fighter. Got the best swordsman this side of Tamriel, as that lout in the corner likes to remind me. He rolled his shoulders. And I'm no siding milk drinker myself if you're worried. I'm sure you're both lethal. Aye. That we are. I told you. I'm looking for someone with a good sense of the terrain. He leaned in again. 100 septums up front, and 100 after we find what I'm looking for. Make it 150 up front and 200 on the other end, and we have a deal. Maybe she could just price him out. Then again, 350 septums should be enough for expediting the process on getting her requisitioned evidence back from the city guards, so if he actually shelled out the cash, the guards wouldn't return her gold, of course, but that didn't matter as much. She just needed the letter by the time Thalmor returned. The Nord rumbled a guttural laugh. In the corner, his partner cocked his head to the side, watching them from behind his helmet. Hear that, Teldrin? She's almost as expensive as you. Vera put down her mug of unfinished ale and fished for a coin to place on the counter. Let's be clear here. You're buying my expertise. You're not buying anything else. The Nord looked on in confusion, his reddish eyebrows drawing together. Then it dawned on him, and he guffawed. If I were looking for that kind of guide, lass, I'd be huffing and puffing my way up to the Temple of Dibella. No offense, it's not like you're not fetching and all. But it ain't like that, and I'll vouch for him too. He motioned with his chin. We won't touch a hair on your head. Fine. It was out before she could bite it back. He grinned again, extending his hand, large and calloused with weapon work. I'm Undar. What's your name then? Vera, she said. They shook on it. Undar straightened, raking his long mane back from his face. Both the mane and the face looked like they could use a wash. His armor, too, was covered in a thick layer of road grime. He didn't smell too great either. It's getting late. Let's meet tomorrow morning, and I'll explain the situation. I'll have your money then. Vera nodded. She already regretted agreeing. With any luck, Undar would change his mind and find someone else. Ciro, Oblivion, take you. Don't just lurk there like some sodding chorus. Come greet our new partner. Undar was loud, the sort of man who took up room like he was owed it. Vera ignored the curious stares of the other patrons. Her eyes went to Vorstag, who was getting up, unsteady on his feet from another day of drinking. Alarm prickled her spine. Vorstag could get a tad unpredictable when he felt slighted, which was most of the time when he was drunk, He stared at her with an unpleasant leer. Vorstag wasn't the worst of them, but he wasn't great. He'd ignored Vera at first. Courtesy of Muiri, who turned heads wherever she went. It suited Vera fine, and she stuck to the apprentice alchemist like a particularly clingy, invisible burr whenever she had to go anywhere in the city. She liked the girl, and Muiri seemed grateful for the company. But something was eating her on the inside, something dark and unpleasant that she couldn't bring out into the light of day. She'd gotten peculiar in the past few weeks, secretive, muttering something about the Night Mother, whatever that was. It got harder and harder to drag her out of the hag's cure. Maybe when all this was said and done, she'd have enough coin left over for one of the long-term rooms in the inn. Vorstag, in the meantime, was striding forth, or rather wobbling forth unsteadily, trying to look like he was striding. Vera had lost some of her star of cat look since she arrived, her figure filling out and her skin shedding some of its malnourished roughness. Bosmer men seemed to like her for some reason. Something about her features or figure either struck them as just the right kind of exotic or as just the right kind of familiar. She couldn't tell which. There was something about social class there too, whom you approached and whom you left well enough alone. The Nords usually didn't give her so much as a second look, but there was always the exception that confirmed the rule. Point was, right around the time Muiri got herself firmly ensconced in the apothecary with only her herbs and her muttering for company, Vorstag, damn him, had suddenly discovered Vera's existence. Eventually, she'd need protection. You couldn't live in Markarth long-term without paying off someone to look out for you. She hadn't committed yet, even though Bothala had been dropping hints. There was a man, she'd said, someone who could yank on some threads behind the scenes, could make some problems go away. Problems like Vorstag, or overly dutiful city guards. She had considered taking a lover, not so much for the pleasure of it, as for the added insurance. Bored men were dangerous, and there were quite a few bored men in Markarth. Those who didn't want to slave in the mines, or those who didn't have the connections to land a better job. Pay, Nord. I'm talking to you. Vorstag stumbled forward, one hand braced on the back of a chair for added stability, the other going to the hilt of his sword. This wasn't going well. Vera's eyes darted to the exit, but the bar was in the way. Why'd she sit on that side? Did I hear correctly? You're looking for a guide? He was slurring his words, definitely not going well. Well, look no further. Best swordsman in the Reach, right here. Unnar looked him over, and if I ever find myself looking for a swordsman, I'll make sure I come right to you, friend. A warning had crept into his voice, something hard beneath the earlier conviviality. Right now, I have other needs. Vorstag's leer went oily. Oh, I bet you do. Hate to be the bearer of bad news then, but I think she overcharged you. Isn't that right, doll? They were drawing eyes in earnest now, the other patrons shuffling in their seats for a better look at the prospective entertainment. Vera bit her tongue and inched closer to the exit. She didn't need this. She survived because she didn't draw attention to herself. Vorstag was a pain, but she could handle him, unless his wounded pride called for retribution in some dark alley. These two were just passing through. They would reap none of the consequences. The chitin-wearing fellow stood up from his chair and made his way over towards them, his movements deceptively lazy. That sense of dread pulled at Vera's stomach again, but it was too late by then. It was over in seconds. Vorstag didn't react. Vera didn't think he so much as heard. Chitin Suit's hand landed on the Nord's shoulder, a friendly gesture to diffuse the tension. The oaf began to turn around, and then he collapsed onto the floor in a nerveless heap, like a tree falling. And had she been standing anywhere else, it would have been easy to miss the thumb that dug into the pressure point on the side of Vorstag's neck. The associate turned to the barkeep. Looks like your patron had a few too many drinks, Sergio. The voice was a surprise. He was too short for a Nord, so Vera had expected the crisp lilt of imperial diction, not this sardonic, raspy drawl like smoke and chocolate. The accent, too, wasn't something she'd heard before. Whoever this guy was, he was a trained killer. No wonder Unnar wasn't looking for a merc. Apologies. He didn't sound apologetic in the slightest. Instead, he stepped over Vorstag and stalked closer. and then he pulled off his helmet. Vera choked back an instinctive scream. Fuck, it's a demon. Bluish gray skin, crimson eyes with oversized irises that swallowed most of the sclera in a gaunt face that looked like something out of a biblical illustration. The kind that promised you fire and brimstone and bat-winged bastards with pitchforks. She blinked, trying to dislodge the apparition. The apparition refused to be dislodged. She'd read about Oblivion. Was this one of its denizens? No wonder he had kept his helmet on. She blinked again. The initial shock settled some. No, the fellow was an elf of some kind. The bony facial structure, the iris size, all of that fit with the typology she had begun to assimilate. But fucking hell. That coloring was rough. His lips quirked in amusement. Much as I'd like to flatter myself into believing that you've been struck speechless by my good looks, by your expression, I'm guessing you've never seen a Dunmer. Is that so? Get your shit together, you idiot. A Dunmer. She'd read about those too. Vera forced her shoulders into a shrug. Are you from Morrowind then? Spectacularly inane questions aside, there was still the mess of Vorstag. No one was in a hurry to drag him to his room either. With any luck, he wouldn't remember any of it. But since when had she been lucky? I was born in the city of Blacklight. Another smirk. You should visit there if you ever get the chance. It's spectacular. She was still gaping, and he was enjoying it, the bastard. He extended a chitin-clad hand, the same hand that had put Vorstag out of commission. Teldrin Zero, blade for hire. Best swordsman Unnar's money could buy. His eyes darted to his Nord employer. I'm glad I'll finally be traveling with someone who seems competent. Changey, Vera's jaw tightened. She could tell a dig when she heard one. She hadn't exactly stood up for herself back there. Nope. In fact, she was about to turn tail and get the hell away from the entire mess. Apparently, that hadn't left Chitin with the best first impression. Still, she shook the offered hand and repressed the urge to wipe off her palm on her trousers. The texture of the armor was unpleasant until money changes hands. It's just a verbal agreement, she offered cautiously. Always leave yourself an exit. Quite right. Luckily, I'm not the one holding the purse strings. Another sharp smirk. If you know what I mean. What you mean, you demonic-looking putz, is that you don't think I'm worth the coin, Vera thought. And maybe the coin wasn't worth the trouble either. There was still something off about this entire proposal. Oh, quit hassling the girl, Teldrin. Or have you forgotten that the guide was your idea? It was, at that. He propped himself on the bar stool Vera had vacated earlier. I hope you're as good at finding things as your employer claimed. He lifted the unfinished mug of ale Vera had abandoned and brought it to his lips. Aside from trouble, that is. Vera narrowed her eyes. There was something beneath the lazy sarcasm. Something like a warning. Nope. Whatever this was, it wasn't worth the coin. She'd find some other way to get her letter back, but she'd be damned if she let the demonic-looking Merce have the last word. She turned to face him. Chitin was watching her over the rim of his glass with those strange crimson eyes. You're in Markarth, Sarah. Here, if you're not careful, trouble finds you. He cackled. Actually, legitimately cackled. Are you? He motioned with his requisitioned ale. Is she what? Careful, that is. Fuck him. Vera shrugged, swallowing back the sudden urge to kick the bar stool from under his ass. I'm still alive, aren't I? Funny thing with that. He took another sip. You are. Until you aren't. Enough, Teldrin. Stop trying to scare the girl away, or you'll be looking for someone to take us to that God's damn cave yourself. Cave? Which cave? She did know those, well enough to know that there were some that you didn't go near if you planned on ever coming out. Don't mind him. He's a bellyacher. Vera? Was it? We'll meet you tomorrow then. How about breakfast? My treat. She considered asking for more money, but that would have meant preemptive acquiescence to whatever this was. She hadn't committed to anything yet. Minimally, asking Bothilla how much of a fee she could expect from the guards and whether the alchemist's contacts might offer a better deal would not go remiss. If she was outpriced from the start, there was no point in rocking the boat. Something about these two gave her bad vibes. It's a mining town. Breakfast is served early. The Nord laughed, a big, full-throated bellow. Then we'd better not stay up late, eh? Night, lass. The Dunmer simply gestured with his ale. Good night, Vera offered, and made for the door. Vorstag, still on the floor, was stirring awake. That was the Silver Blood Inn for you. You could get knifed on the floor, and no one would so much as pause in their drinking, one way or another. She didn't want to be there when he finally came to. She hurried to the apothecary, trying to stick to the better-lit parts of the city. The clank of the heavy door at her back brought relief, as it always did. She didn't mind the constant fear so much. It too had been a habitual companion for longer than she could remember. It was more the added layer, the unease of the prospective arrangement, and the promise of the goddamn coins. She could stay with Bothilla for a time, but it was pretty obvious that the eponymous owner of the Hag's Cure wasn't exactly looking for a second apprentice. There was an agenda there too, and Vera wasn't sure she wanted to step into it. And while there was no guarantee that Calcelmo would take her on, even with the letter, the memory of the purple gem kept yanking at her with a craving she couldn't quite identify. The shop was dark and quiet. Vera walked down the stone hallway, trailing her fingertips along the wall. Where had everyone gone? The door to the room she shared with Muiri was closed, but a small light filtered from the crack where feet had worn a groove in the stone after years of use. Markarth was old, with a depth of accumulated time, with no visible bottom. She wrapped her fingers against the metal and waited for a response. Nothing. She pushed the door open. Muiri was sprawled on the bed, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Vera's feet carried her forward. The Breton lifted her head from the pillow, her face red and puffy and streaked with tears. Muiri, what is it? It looked like the last few weeks of strangeness were finally going to come to a head after all. Well, it had been a strange sort of night. The other woman wiped her face with the back of her hand and sat up. Her gaze was empty, save for the horror, black and deep-rooted. I'm pregnant. The bastard left me with child. Stark from the beginning. In retrospect, that had been the wrong thing to ask. The beginning stretched back for the better part of Muiri's life, starting with Windhelm, the coalstone city on the ocean, where the girl grew up with some rich family as a sort of satellite or chaperone or pet companion to the two sisters. It didn't make too much sense to Vera. Her understanding of nobility was based on the two works of Shakespeare she'd read. It's not that books had been few exactly. Vera's mother had been a militant collector, and they had at least 25 between the two of them. 4 encyclopedias, too. But after the Great Burn of 78, she'd been 17 half a lifetime ago. One had to be packing some serious firepower to get a hold of any, since anything that was ever printed had been claimed by then. The Citadels probably had amazing libraries, but Vera was from the outskirts of Split City, formerly Toronto on her mother's maps, and it hadn't fared so well after the influx of climate migrants from the south. Mostly young, mostly white, mostly male, armed to the teeth and vicious as could be. A gleeful cruelty to them. And they had numbers on their side. Vera's mother had tried to cram as much education into her only child as she could, from early on, sensing the ruin to come, no doubt. She'd done her best, but she was a cartographer, not a historian. In any case, whatever Muiri's life with the Shatter Shields had been, it was rosy until it wasn't. Someone had killed one of the sisters, and from there, things had gone to shit, and fast. Muiri had taken up with some bloke she met over drinks at a local tavern, and they'd gotten friendly. Vera couldn't blame her. Sometimes, these kinds of comforts were all you had, and you leaned on them because there was nothing else to carry your weight. It went on for a while, until the poor girl finally figured out that there was an agenda. Vera could have told her that from the start. When wasn't there one? But Muiri's life had been relatively simple up until then, all things considered. So Markarth and Barthella hadn't been a vocational choice exactly, but a matter of picking up the pieces, trying not to slash yourself open on them in the process. Vera could relate. Once Muiri was all out of words, they sat quietly in the dimly lit room, the low rumble of the immeasurably vast, abandoned guts of the city vibrating through the walls of the apothecary, like a great beast snoring in its sleep. Vera wondered idly if something like this would one day come to her former world. New life built on old detritus, with little inkling of what came before. Nothing but myths and mystery, stories of something that was there first, but vanished in the blink of an eye, and whose purpose was as unfathomable as it was lost. It was a comforting thought, in a way. Some things were best forgotten. "How far along are you?" she asked, her arm around Muiri's shoulders. There was a time when Martha held her just like that. Over the same damn ordeal, too. It wasn't quite the same, mind. They had found a stash of Plan B, expired on a college campus, cordoned off because of the radiation. Their Geiger counter said it was safe enough if they didn't come too close to where the collider had been. In the student health center, miraculously left mostly intact because of the packs of feral dogs. Martha, still bright as starlight under the grime of their shared flight from the ruins of their home when they finally decided, over a shared bottle of moonshine, that this just wasn't livable. Martha, before the pneumonia took her, antibiotics hadn't worked for 20 years, so it was a death sentence most of the time, and they both knew it. The winters had gotten bad, what with the Gulf Stream not doing its thing. Muiri sighed, rubbed her face with both hands. It's been 4 months since. She trailed off, clenched her hands over the soft curve of her belly, where the fabric of her dress hugged the skin. "Since you came to Bothella?" "Yeah, not. Since Muiri and the asshole who got her with child fucked last, more likely," Vera guessed. That didn't mean a thing in terms of the pregnancy. Muiri could have gotten knocked up the first time they did it, for all she knew. She tightened her arm around the girl's shoulders. Muiri huffed a sigh, exhausted from the toil of nocturnal admissions. She slumped, burying her face against Vera's neck. A safe haven, however temporary. I had little choice. Pain mixed with anger, an old festering boil. You have to let it drain, love. It won't serve you. It won't serve you. They turned me out. Vera nodded against Muiri's hair. Have you told Bothella? She forced her voice into a steady beat, practical even. Just another hurdle to take care of. It was better than asking the obvious question. Why hadn't Muiri remedied the problem earlier? The alchemy of this place was. It was sophisticated, and more than Vera's world could ever offer. Imagine the thousands of plants, every single one of them potentially useful. How did you get your mind around such richness? Muiri straightened, smoothing her hands over her skirt. She won't let me work with poisons if she knows I'm with child. Thank the divines, I didn't have the morning sickness, but I won't be able to hide things much longer. She paused, turning it over in her mind. And without the poison work, that's as many as 6 orders out of 10. At least, Vera hummed in agreement. Over the past month, she'd gotten the sense of how Bothella ran her business, based on the ingredients she'd been tasked with bringing back. You had your love potions, aphrodisiacs and stimulants, some vasodilators too, she guessed, mostly bought by the wealthier men of Markarth. Bothella liked to joke about how it gave them a bear's temper, but the joke was only a thin veneer that made the underlying truth easier to swallow. The violence of Markarth ran deep as its vessels of blood and silver. Then you had the restoratives, but those were cheap. Not because the ingredients were easy to procure, but because Bothella had an ethics, a sliding scale that made the basic potions, the stuff that cured the colds and the fevers and the bruises and scrapes, easy to purchase even if you didn't have much gold clinking in your pocket. Mining town and all that. And then you had the poisons. It wasn't like the poisons you'd think. Not the stuff that might kill you outright after one sip or tainted wine. Not like in the stories. No, poisons were subtle. Clinically induced ulcer. Clinically induced kidney dysfunction. Slow things that worked over years of subtle ingestion, drained you little by little, unobtrusively, with plenty of room for plausible deniability. A bad drinking habit, a poor diet, a habit of smoking after your meals, things you had to brew on the regular for the right patron. It'll be over in 6 months, give or take. Vera tried to sound reassuring despite the questionable guesstimate. Muiri's belly, now that she could see it, looked firmly into the second trimester. Then it would be lactating if you wanted to keep it, but just, don't taste the potions. See, Muiri's gaze turned distant, trained on a murky future she couldn't see through. I can't. Why didn't you go to Bothala earlier? Not like that was going to help now. What if you did? Keep it, I mean. Muiri shook her head vehemently, and then slumped against the wall, drained and lost. Now, this is Markarth B, and I haven't got the money to raise a babe, not even if I work myself to the bone. Bothala pays me what she can, but Bothela's business was doing all right. But they weren't exactly rolling in gold, what with Yngvar coming by every few days to skim off the top. Unless someone took it upon themselves to overthrow the Silver Blood stranglehold on the place, things weren't likely to change in the immediate future. Fair was fair. Markarth was a shithole, as pitiless as any place she'd known, just more organized about it. But Muiri hadn't done anything to rid herself of the pregnancy either, despite having the means. There's more to the world than Markarth. How much would you need to start over somewhere else? Muiri considered. I don't know. Right now, I can't even afford the carriage, never mind setting up in a new place. She nestled closer with an exhausted sigh. If I'd known half the alchemy I know now when I met Elaine, I wouldn't be in this mess. That's what galls me the most. She huffed a laugh, shaky, bitterly sardonic. If you knew half of what you know now, you'd have told this Dufant character to go jump into the sea of ghosts. Muiri chuckled, a bit more heartily this time, but the bleakness returned quickly. There was a maxim, one Vera's mother had a fondness for. Always put on your mask first. The etymology had to do with air travel, her mother had explained, though airplanes were as extinct as the elephants by the time Vera came about. But the origins of the saying didn't make it any less apt. Point was, you couldn't help someone else until you had firm ground under your own feet. But once you did, there was the other part of the expression, about helping the person in the seat next to you. Muiri was in the seat next to her, as far as Vera was concerned, but there wasn't much that could be done until she found something other than hot coals to walk on. She sat, calculating. The resources that her pay diverted could be rerouted back to Muiri if she managed to convince Calcelmo to take her on as a helper. She could still forage for the apothecary, simply selling the ingredients if she needed the extra coin. Muiri could probably hold on to her secret for another month, too, if she ended up carrying small or low. By then, Calcelmo would be back, and they could break the happy news to Bothella as soon as Vera found new employment, provided the Altmer didn't just tell her to scat. One way or another, she had to get that damn letter, and quickly. She made the decision, then and there, with Muiri's tears soaking into the collar of her worn shirt. We're going to figure this out. In the meantime, don't do anything rash. Muiri nodded muzzily, the emotional exhaustion finally catching up to her. Vera got up from the bed, plucked a few stalks of frost miriam from the dwindling bushel hanging over the hearth. They'd need to restock soon, and set the kettle over the fire. I'm going to wait up for Bothala to talk inventory. Get some sleep, all right? She pinched the bridge of her nose, trying to chase away the onset of a headache. Muiri picked herself up from the bed with a tired groan. Bothella is going to have my hide for this. Vera snorted. Are you kidding? She will grandmother you within an inch of your life once she knows, so best prepare yourself. Bothella's cynical carapace was mostly that. A defense against a world that kept trying to eat you. Beneath all the spikes and the chitin, the old woman was a softie. Mara, preserve me. I hope you're right. Vera watched Muiri walk out of the room, presumably to the privy. Yep, another month. And it was definitely going to start showing. And speaking of chitin, she had work to do if she was going to take up Unnar and his demonic-looking Dunmer sidekick on their dubious proposal. By the time Bothella returned, Muiri had gone off to bed, and Vera had taken up the entire counter with her maps. With most of the satellites reduced to floating junk without anything to receive or interpret the data they still broadcasted, cartography had been one of Vera's most essential skills. She started mapping the Reach early on, while Lovenar was still alive. The old herbalist had supplied her with charcoal and parchment readily enough, his initial puzzlement at the contour lines Vera used to approximate elevation seating way to a sort of grumbling curiosity, then appreciation. Once he got the hang of the representational conventions she used, his short-term memory was shit, but when it came to abstract stuff, the old mirror was sharp. He helped her fine-tune, correcting mistakes, filling in the blanks, adding layers of history to the topography. Vera's foraging had provided the rest. Unne had mentioned a cave. There were caves and caverns aplenty. The Reach was mostly limestone, a watery mess of underground erosion and man-made expansions on said erosion, of mines and karsts and Dwemer tunnels reaching into the mountain's bowels. Trouble was, most of them were occupied by all sorts of unpleasantness. What's this, girl? Are you planning an invasion? Vera looked up. The old woman thumped the jar of void salts she had brought on the counter and helped herself to some of the tea Vera had made, before collapsing into the carved armchair piled high with furs and cushions next to the hearth. So, did that nice young Nord manage to track you down? Vera cocked an eyebrow. If you mean Unnar, I'm not sure that young Fitz, and the jury's still out on nice, but yes, he did. Bothella took a sip of her tea, winced, and went to rummage for moon sugar in the cupboard. How Dwemer furniture managed to look both dainty and blocky was the real mystery of the vanished race, as far as Vera was concerned. You all look like young peoples to me. Get to my age. You'll see. Where's that? Ah, there. You two go through my moon sugar when I'm not looking. Good thing the Khajiit are still camped outside of town. The old woman settled back into her chair, stirring her tea with an oversized spatula. Unna, that was the name. Curious fellow. And his Dunmer hired hand, still as fresh off the boat as you'd please with that armor and that accent. Vera knew better than to insert herself into Bothella's monologue. The old woman had a way of approaching a topic like a saber cat approached its prey, stalking it from a great distance. Quite the looker, isn't he? Had Muiri all giggly like a blushing maiden. Vera blinked. Ooh, Unna, or the demonic-looking Dunmer. She said. So, how long will you be gone then? Vera's eyebrows drew in confusion. Had Bothella stopped by the inn on her way back to collect some gossip? The old woman dismissed Vera's interrogative look with a wave of her spatula. Vorstag made a spectacle of himself again, I hear. I'm glad someone finally put that good-for-nothing in his place. But you, Bothella thrust the business end of the spatula in Vera's direction, might want to spend a few days outside the city. Why? Oh, this wasn't going to be anything good. Did something happen after I left? Why couldn't Vorstag just get eaten by bears? It's not Vorstag you need to worry about, girl. Bothella lowered her voice. I've been hearing things. About Andolema planning another raid. Oblivion swallow him whole. Been asking questions about anyone who's new. Her wrinkled face scrunched up in distaste or derision, the intricate tracework of her facial tattoo obscuring the exact flavor of her expression. I swear that Mer would crawl up his own arsehole if he thought he'd find the Talos worshiper in there. Vera snorted, despite the sudden unease. Once Lovenar had learned about Vera's less-than-Nernian origins, he had told her to always be mindful of two groups, the Thalmor and the vigilance of Stendar. So far, the advice had served her well. We could send an anonymous report. It has come to our attention that Justiciar Undolemar is harboring a Talos cult up his rectum. Bothella's dry cackles echoed through the chamber before the old woman brandished her spatula in mock threat. Hush, girl. There's a time for being clever, and there's a time for being smart. And the smart thing would be for you to take yourself out of the city until it all blows over. I have enough of a mess on my hands as it is, what with Muiri's bun in the oven and no husband to claim it. Oh. Bothella clicked her tongue against the roof of her mouth and shook her head, a sarcastic twinkle in her eyes. I'm old, child, not blind. Why do you think I hired you? Don't get me wrong now. You turned out to be a good investment. I wasn't lying to that Nord when I said you have a knack for finding things. But this is Markarth. We watch out for our own. Vera nodded. That much made perfect sense. So, that brings me back to that Nord and whatever he's looking for. How much did he offer to pay you? 350. Bothella quirked her brow. I haggled a bit. High price for a guide. Whatever he's looking for, it must be worth more to him than his gold. And what do you plan on doing with all that coin once you have it? If I have it, Vera thought, I want to pay off the guards and get Lovenar's letter back. Do you think it'll be enough? She sighed, rubbing her forehead. The headache wasn't going away. She needed sleep if she was going to meet Unnar for breakfast. The night wasn't getting any younger, closer to 500, unless you sweeten the deal. Though who knows, perhaps the child god will find himself in a helpful mood. They won't hand it over with a pretty please, that's for sure. The alchemist paused, ruminating, thought about what I mentioned. Might cost you less than the guards. Ah, yes, Bothella's mysterious contact. There it was again. I have a feeling it'll still cost me, just not in septums. At least with coins, there are no strings attached. Bothella sighed. There are always strings attached, child. I can offer you a roof until you don't need one, but I'd sleep better if you had more than an old woman and a pregnant girl watching over you. You're still set on badgering that old Alt-Makaja once he's back? The memory of the soul gem tugged at Vera again, a phantom warmth in her palm. Yeah, he's no sweep roll, that one. Cantankerous old bat. Bothella stretched and set aside her empty cup. Vera grinned. I have some practice with that. You've been training me well. Watch that sharp tongue of yours, child, or the Hagravens might get it. Bothella tutted, her bony shoulders shaking with chortles. Vera folded her maps and stuffed them back into her knapsack. Bothella, what did you think of Unnar? Really? Something about him feels strange. You won't find 350 septums under a rock on the road is what I think. I'd lend you the money myself if times weren't so lean. The old woman leaned forward. He's asking you to take him around the mountains, not for your hand in marriage. Just don't lose your head over that handsome Dunmer of his, and don't go tangling with the Forsworn. I think I can manage that much. Vera harumphed. If Unnar and his buddy wanted to go poke at Forsworn encampments, they certainly didn't need her to tag along. She would be more than happy to point out the locations, preferably from the adjacent mountain range, and be on her merry way. Bothella nodded. I'll brew you some potions for the road. Get some rest now. Something tells me you got a long day ahead of you. The deep echoes of the bell that marked the end of the night shift at the Snulter reached Vera's ears through the swaddle of dreams and blankets, and she pulled the furs over her head, snuggling deeper into her warm cocoon. The smell of old ash and freshly stacked fire, of frost, Miriam and tundra cotton filtering through the pillowcase was homely, reassuring, a little island of safety she'd carved out for herself. Home. Temporary, yeah, but that was always the case, so you had to enjoy it while it lasted. She counted the muffled strokes, vaguely pleased that she had at least another hour before she had to get herself ready. in time for the second bell that would drag the day shift workers out of bed, into the tavern for a quick meal, for those able to afford it, and then back to the mines. Markarth never slept, pulsing day and night with its extractive heartbeat. It devoured its laborers like a great hungry beast, spitting out bones and broken bodies. But there was always more supply than demand, somehow. A buyer's market. The bell struck another time, and Vera froze. Oh, shit. She hauled herself out of bed, catching the edge of the chamber pot with her heel and sloshing around its nocturnal contents. Stumbled around in mute panic, trying to pull on her clothes, tripped outright over her boots, and almost went sprawling, but caught herself. And then forced herself to stop. Breathe. You're fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. The old, ingrained panic of sudden flight. Of mornings just like these where you thought you had found safe harbor. Until the telltale crackle of approaching gunfire receded with her breaths. That world was behind her. Unne wouldn't melt. He could wait for a bit while she got herself ready, and if not, then perhaps he didn't need her help all that much. If fate wanted to take the lure of coins out of her hands, then maybe that was for the best. With any luck, the Nord had already found someone else to take him traipsing around the countryside. Still, Vera put on her traveling gear. The mismatched pieces of armor she had bought or bartered from huntsmen were aesthetically underwhelming, but they were sturdy and practical. The bow, though, was a jewel. Light as a feather, supple, the yew polished to a warm, creamy glow, and soft as velvet to the touch. A parting gift from a Bosmer hunter she met on the road to Markarth. It was convenience and safety at first, but he'd grown sweet on her. Just sweet, too, in a slightly monosyllabic, taciturn kind of way. But what his tongue lacked in eloquence, it made up in other skills. He was headed somewhere out west, some village, Riverrun or Riverwood, and they traveled together for 2 weeks in the worst blizzard Vera had ever seen. "You're not going to ask me to come with you?" She'd teased in the relative warmth of their shared tent, her hands snaking down the hard planes of his abdomen, following the trail of coarse hairs until he tensed with a groan. The bronze skin over his chest breaking out in goosebumps. He tightened his arms around her. "If I did, would you say yes?" There was a sadness to him. They both knew the answer. "I'm getting old, V. I want to settle down somewhere, have a roof over my head in the winters." She laughed, rolling over him, his hands on her hips guiding her in place. "Want to tell me about your arthritis too, old man?" He had chuckled, a boyish grin in a face that wore its years without apology. "I'll show you arthritis." He had taught her to shoot, putting unnecessary mileage on his journey, little excuses for the detours. Once, a lifetime ago, Dima had shown her how to handle a sniper rifle. It wasn't the same. The bow was a hell of a lot more work. But some things carried over. She hooked the unstrung bow to her pack and hurried into the common room. Bothella greeted her with a curt head shake and a satchel thrust in Vera's direction. The old woman was in the middle of helping a customer. Gordsa, her apron stained with soot and the back of her dress streaked with the sweaty work of the forge, was grousing about the idiot apprentice. It was, as far as Vera could tell, a sort of hobby. Vera waved at the Orsimer Smith and snatched the proffered satchel from Bothella's outstretched hand. "Should last you for a week. Don't get yourself killed. Give me some canis root on your way back." "Where's Muiri?" Bothella's eyes darted from the scale she was using to weigh Gortza's order of fire salts. "I sent her to the Khajiit. That moon sugar won't restock itself. Perhaps she could catch Muiri on her way out of town." If Unnar and his sidekick were set on leaving the same day. By the time Vera got to the tavern, the Silverblood Inn was packed to the gills. Most of the miners had filed out, but at least 24 soldier types in Imperial armor, chipped around the edges and dirty as could be, were milling around, swinging between drunkenly bawdy and drunkenly rowdy. Vera cast her eyes about the place, catching Frabbi Eye's gaze. Klepper's long-suffering better half motioned with her head, and pantomimed an eye roll before bustling over to a group of particularly loud military men at the large table in the corner. They had started a song, Ragnar the Red, as per usual. There was no sign of Unnar. Oh well. She quickly dismissed the brief twinge of disappointment at the thwarted prospect of gold and hung on to the relief lurking beneath the other emotion. This was for the best. She could still go out into the hills for a few days. Getting out of Markarth while the Thalmor were feeling particularly vigilant wasn't such a bad plan. She might as well get breakfast before. One of the soldiers jostled her on his way to the bar, slurring something that might have been meant as an apology, but sorely lacked consonants to pass. Vera righted herself, looked up, and there was chitin suit from the previous night. The Dunmer was propping up the wall on the other side of the tavern, partially obscured by the shadows of the massive hearth. Apparently, he had been watching her for some time because he motioned with his mug the second Vera's eyes landed on him. He had foregone the anonymity of his helmet for the sake of his drink. No wonder, though, Vera exhaled through her nose, trying to quell the sudden flare of unease. At this point, it was a little too late to backpedal. Maybe Demon Chops would just announce that they had moved on and hired someone else, and that would be the end of it. She made her way over to the back of the tavern, through the throng of bodies. Red eyes followed her progress. The Dunmer looked faintly amused. Like a slaughterfish looks vaguely jovial before it tries to bite your leg off. The soldiers at the large table abandoned Ragnar the Red to his decapitation and were hollering a new lyrical offering about bears. I thought you two had left already. Demon Chops lifted an eyebrow, the sharp wings of his facial tattoo accentuating the prominent brow ridges.